Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud, with Francis Wade and Art Gelwicks.
Welcome back, everybody, to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, and I am joined here today, as usual, by Augusto Pinaud, Francis Wade, and Art Gelwicks. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning.
Hey, guys.
Great to have you all here today. We are going to be talking today about something called the do not do list, in deference to not messing up what this very vital productivity tool can be to you. I'm going to pass the microphone over to Augusto. Augusto, do you want to explain to our audience a little bit about what the do not do list is and how it functions, and then we can get into conversation about how it might be practical in a productivity system?
Yes. So I discovered the idea of the do not do list a long time ago. And it was under the understanding that as you get into being more productive, getting more into productivity, getting done the most important things, there is also a set of things that you should stop doing, that you need to pay attention. It's not only what we do, but it's also as important what we stop doing. Because there are things that are simply not worth it, that simply should not be in your list, that you need to acknowledge that you need to stop doing. That doesn't matter what there are. They like in productivity, that will change from person to person. But it is important to acknowledge that there are things that may have been good to do or may have been never good to do that you need to stop doing. And that's how this idea of the do not do list came for me. So I've been practicing this list, and it has grown, and there are things now that I'm so conscious that I will never do again that I have even removed out of the list. But the idea was, see what things on your day-to-day you do that in the name of productivity you need to stop doing or you should stop doing.
So, Augusto, this is likened in my mind, and we can compare and contrast this to the National Do Not Call List Registry. I don't know why that comes to mind when I think about this. Maybe the do not call. But the idea here is that you're adding things to a list that's filtering out, in my mind, it's filtering out calls that you don't want to receive, most likely commercial solicitations that are calling you. So by getting yourself put onto this national do not call registry, you're filtering yourself out. You're opting out of calls. Is that what you're doing in terms of the do not do list? Are you using that as a filter from what shouldn't show up in the first place on your list? Or are you using this as a function for looking at it and reviewing it, for saying, okay, these are the things I'm not going to do today, this week, this month?
And hopefully, in some of those cases, hopefully ever. So the answer obviously, like a lot of these answers, is a little bit more complex than that. So let me see if I can give you a couple of examples of my list that then will give you a better idea. Okay. And I'm going to, I can't give you multiple, but I'm going to give you one that is controversial. Okay. Years ago, my main tool since 2012 has been the iPad. That's my main machine. That's what I take every day with me. And I begin receiving email on my phone before that. What I learned receiving email in one of the items on my do not do list is I do not check work email on the iPhone. Okay, obviously was on the iPhone when I discovered that. What I was doing was constantly open my iPhone, checking email, seeing if there was anything, just to not do anything about it. I eventually wait until I get back to the iPad and then do something, file, organize, define the actions, whatever it was. So what I noticed is, well, I've been extremely inefficient here because I'm opening this email inbox, checking things 3 or 4 times when really there is nothing to do with it. So when I identify that, I say, you know what, this behavior needs to stop. So I want to put on my list, I do not check work email. And even when as far as deactivate the work email on my phone. And I actually remember you and I were exchanging some information. You told me I send it to you via email. I said, oh, sorry, you need to send it to this special email. There is one special email that I only receive on the phone, and it's the only one I receive on the phone. It's a private email. My wife have it, you have it. I think it's a total of 10 or 15 people. I don't want to receive anything on the email. That's one example. I can give you another example. I do not test productivity tools that cannot be backed up. Okay, part of what I do as a writer and as a coach is testing productivity tools. Because sometimes I get customers who call me and say, hey, I would love to move to Trello. What I can do about Trello? And you are like, oh, I don't know. I don't know anything about Trello. So you come and play. And sometimes that playing require me to move for some days or for a week. So I really understand how this tool works. And I have come to a rule for me as well as for my clients. If the tool cannot be backed up, that's not a tool you want to move. Because if that tool failed, you lose everything and all the effort and all the time you have put in there. So those are two examples that come into this. They are not necessarily big things, but they are things that allow me to keep in a more consistent trend of productivity.
What comes to mind is not, I don't think I have a written list, but I certainly have a sort of an experience of people that I don't want to hang out with to some degree. I know that when I was dating, I had a sort of invisible list of characteristics of people I don't want to date. So if I call it a do not do list, but it was kind of a do not mess with list. Okay, don't mess with that kind of person. If this person has this kind of profile, back then it was Match.com. Don't reply to that person. Don't go after the person who says that you have to earn 100,000 US a year, or don't even contact me. But I had a sort of an imaginary list, and that's translated into business because I recall a project I was on, and I worked with this guy who was a complete unknown to me. His behaviors were so strange, and ultimately I was so stressed as a result of it that I went looking up, definitions of psychopaths. I figured out what a sociopath is. I learned what gaslighting is. I learned what a narcissist is because I couldn't figure out where this guy was coming from, right? Over time, I've added people to this list, and it's a similar set of characteristics that if someone starts telling you who they are early in a project, or forget in the project, in a proposal phase, or if I'm meeting with a client for the first time and they start to tell you who they are, my do not do list, I guess, is don't mess with this particular kind of person, either dating or on a project kind of basis, because for whatever reason, it could be all me. It could be that I'm just, I just have the kind of flaws that map perfectly with a particular type of personality, and the result is stressful. But I do have a do not mess with that kind of person list. And whenever I meet someone who sort of matches the profile, I make sure not to take any extra steps.
So, Augusto, does that fit into the definition of what you're talking about here? What's the way in which you create different do not do lists? So that's my question: is the do not do list one list? Is it a list that you then have different categories for? So in this case, Francis has a do not do list for people, right? Do not interact or engage with these people. And do you create separate lists for that? And when would you review that kind of list?
It will depend how long your list is or not. I have a one that I call the do not need list. Okay, that really is part of the do not do list because it's things. For example, once in a while I get this idea that I should get, or used to before the iPad Pro at least, that I should go and get a planner on paper because I really wanted to play with paper. Okay, and eventually I say, this is ridiculous. You go play with the paper. Remember that you get a strong reminder of why paper doesn't work for you, but you have spent a ridiculous amount of money because you like good paper. So eventually I put on my list, I do not buy paper stuff because as much as Sounds incredibly. As soon as I implement it, doesn't work. And I call it part of my do not need list, things I do not need. That at the end is a subset of this do not do list. And what Francis is doing is great, except he's not writing it down. And the reason I believe you should write it down is because that way you have less chance to be fooled by your own self. You know, when you write the things really specifically, you are less prone to romanticize what is happening there, or you are going to say, you know what, this guy fit every requirement on this list, and regardless, I'm going to go against my list. When that thing is on your mind, you tend to play with that in a much more easier way, because now you are negotiating with any proof that is never good. You know, like that. I can give you another example that works for a lot of people. That is on my do not do list. I used to struggle for years to wake up early. Okay, even understanding the power of waking up early, I struggle terribly. You know, when the alarm sound at 4 in the morning, it's like, oh, you know, come on, 5 more minutes. Okay, and well, everybody knows what happened after 5 more minutes. So after struggling with this for a little bit, I say, okay, this is getting ridiculous. I can't wake up, and I need to wake up at that time because I need that time. And so I noticed, okay, let me see what is the problem. And what I came up with was a decision or the rule for that do not do list that says, I do not negotiate my wake up time in the morning, but the night before. So before I go to bed, I can say, you know what? I'm tired. I'm going to sleep until 6. But if instead of that I say, I'm tired, but I'm anyways going to wake up at 4, then that's the end of the negotiation. At 4 a.m., when that alarm sounds, sorry, myself is more like a terrorist and he will never wake up at that time. So there is no negotiation at that time. Okay, at 4 a.m., if I said the night before is 4 a.m., when that alarm sounds, there is not 5 minutes. There is not, oh, it's, you know, it's cold, or I'm tired, or I just sleep crooked and then my back hurt. No, too bad. Sorry, dude. You know, tomorrow you can, you know, tonight you can negotiate for tomorrow, but you cannot negotiate in the morning. And what that did was increase my rate of success with waking up at 4 in the morning. That then bring me an incredible set of results and things that I accomplished that I knew I was going to accomplish. I was just struggling terribly with the idea of waking up that early.
That's a great example. So thank you for sharing that. Art, I wanted to turn over to you for a moment and ask, do you use the do not do list in your world? Do you use a flavor of it?
In listening to what Francis and Augusto have laid out here so far, I realize that I do actually use a version of this list approach, and I use it with Amazon. I have a list, kind of a wish list within Amazon that I use as my buy but do not pay for list, for lack of a better term. What I'm dealing with is that natural reaction we all have, that dopamine trigger of hitting the add to cart button for something cool that we find in Amazon. It's one of those things where I'll see the deals that come through and it's like, oh, that really looks cool, or that microphone looks neat, or that set of headphones looks wild. And rather than hitting the one click to purchase, I'll go through and I'll add it to my maybe purchase list. By doing that, though, I've discovered two things happen. One, I get that little dopamine click of like, oh, that's cool. I could get that. The other thing, though, is I found that I often will forget that I've done that because I've completed that action. I've looked at it. I've analyzed it. I've decided, yep, that's cool. But I don't actually make the purchase. And I go back 2, 3, 4 weeks later and I look at that list and I go, what the heck was I thinking about getting that for? So it's the same type of a behavior. You're capturing the idea, the issue, the topic, in this case, the thing in the shopping cart. You're mentally processing it, and you're deciding that, you know what, I don't ever need to do anything with this. This is not necessarily actionable, but you still need to close that loop. And for me, that's the best example of doing it. I don't do it with my normal to-do lists. I find those are actually a little bit more difficult because when I put something on my to-do list, I'm hesitant to take it back off. I don't know why. It's kind of a brain thing, but I am hesitant to take it back off. So I look at it and say, okay, maybe I'll slide this around here. Maybe I'll move this around there. And eventually get to the point where it's been on the list so long. It's like, you know what? It's not getting done. It's got to come off. So maybe I'll tackle prioritization to help with the do not do part of it. But that's the closest I have to something that I currently do all the time.
So how I'm understanding this, and I'm repeating for my own edification here, and I think listeners will hopefully appreciate that, which is, as I'm hearing it, I'm thinking about the reality that, like a to-do list, task list, or even a shopping list, by reducing its prioritization, in your case adding it to a wish list, you're creating some level of balance, right? The space between stimulus and responses, as Dr. Viktor Frankl and Dr. Covey expanded upon, is, space between stimulus and response is control. Creating some distance between what triggers you to do something and what you're going to eventually do gives you perspective and control on that thing. Maybe when you feel like you're going to do something you don't want to do and you're triggered by that, creating a list that you can then sort of track as, maybe I don't. It's sort of like when I write an angry email. And I write more of them than I care to admit. But I write angry emails on occasion, and then I save them to draft. A couple hours later, I look at that email and I go, okay, that person did not mean probably what they said, or I'm just, I was in a bad mood, and then I redraft that email, and now it sounds less crabby, right? It sounds less grumpy from me, and then I go along. So I could potentially have a list of things of like, okay, these are triggers. So when I'm triggered by these things, let's defer them to a list. In this case, my draft emails is a list, and park them there for some period of time. Is that kind of where you're coming from, Art?
Well, there's an approach to it tied to the prioritization of tasks, where you look at, the priorities. If I think about Todoist, it's got priorities 1 through 4, if I remember correctly. And if you bump it all the way down to the bottom of that priority structure, you're basically saying, I'm probably never going to do anything with this. It's the same mindset. The only problem I get into with this whole approach is, and this is nothing criticizing on what Augusto's lining out, because I think it's a great way to handle these kinds of things, is I can see the pushback on how much effort are you putting into managing and administering the things that you are blatantly saying you're never going to do. Is there too much work for no return? I'm not sure. It's more of a question than an answer.
Let me give you an example of one of the first items that got into this list. That answer maybe that you were saying. When I grow up and as a kid, and part of my weekly allowance was tied up to clean my parents' car, my dad's car specifically. Okay, and for some reason, or at least that's how I remember it, okay, he made it so it was the most difficult task a human being need to do. So we could not use the hose because the hose was going to be wasteful. So you need to use a bucket, okay? But until a certain point, the bucket was too big, so you could only fill a little bit of the bucket, okay, of the water, because wasn't strong enough to fill the whole bucket. So it required, I don't know, what it felt like the whole Sunday, okay, to clean the car. And then I remember my dad coming in, walking around the car, okay, and saying, oh, well, it needed here, and it needed here, and it needed here, and then you need to finish the job, but that seems like never finished, okay? But you grow up with that idea that, well, you need to wash the car every week. And years ago, while watching the car, wash the car, get back into, and I'm noticing I'm in this faulty, awful mood. I'm saying, why am I in such a bad mood today? I have no reason to be in a fault. Nothing has happened up to that point. And then I say, well, let me see what I have done today. And then I went, okay, well, I wake up, I have breakfast. I washed the car, and I could feel the mood coming back again. And I say, oh, why am I washing the car instead of taking it to whatever car wash it is in town? that was the moment I said, you know what? This is not worth it, because it's not the 20 minutes of washing the car. It is, I get mad before because I need to wash the car. I get mad for 20 minutes doing the job, and then I get mad for another hour until I forget that I did the job. It's not worth it. That was one of the first items on that list was I will not wash my car ever again. And it was such a liberating thing because was the first time I gave myself permission not to do that task that makes no sense at all, that it really, the cost benefit relationship wasn't even proportional, because it wasn't the 20 minutes, it was the 2 hours I spent mad before and after. Other thing that I came to that list early on in the game was, if you call my cell phone and I do not recognize the number, or the number is unidentified, you're going directly to voicemail. If it's an important message and you are not a telemarketer, you are going to say, hey, it's Art, call me back. My number is 555-5555. Great, then I will call you back. But if your number is not in my list, I'm not even going to waste time entertaining myself. What this item on the do not do list give me was get rid automatically of the guilt that was associated at some point for me of my phone ringing, looking at the number and saying, should I pick? Oh, it's a number in Indianapolis. It may be something interesting. Okay. Now, no, it's part of the rules is if you don't know the phone number, directly to the voicemail. They can leave a voicemail if it's important, and I will call back. And I may check the voicemail immediately, but instead of being 2 minutes of, oh, is this Mr. Peanut? No, Mr. Peanut is my dad. He's not here. Okay, I can avoid all that and then just listen to the voicemail.
I had a similar commitment. I remember I had a do not do list, and that was one of the items. The other one I had was to not ever cut my own lawn ever again. After I used to live in New Jersey, and I had to spend a whole day not just cutting the lawn, but bagging the grass and then driving it over to the depot and dropping it off. And it would turn into a whole day. One day out of the weekend was spent just managing the grass during the summer. And at some point I said, this is crazy. Somebody else can do this for a lot less effort. And if I could pay someone, have them do it and have them manage all the grass removal. But the commonality though that I think the thing you're pointing to is this sense of taking charge of a part of your life that you think you have some obligation to perform or to do, or it's just a habit of mind or of action. And then coming to another level of awareness where you revoke the prior commitment. And from the revoking of the commitment comes a whole new level of energy and freedom. I certainly experienced that when I said I'm no longer going to wash a car. I'm no longer going to cut the lawn. I felt free after that.
And that's exactly what it is. There is a funny story of, this newlywed couple, that they are newlywed, and then they go to the groceries, and the new wife go to the cheese thing and says, can you please give me a pound of cheese? And the husband is looking at the wife, the new husband, like, pound of cheese is only you and I. That's insane. Well, they buy the pound of cheese, get to the house, and then the newly wife start, cutting the thing really thin. And then the new husband is looking at her and say, but we could have asked the people in the store to cut it for us. No. This is the way it's done. You slide really thin half of it, and then you froze the other half. The newly husband is, who said that? Well, that's how it was done in my house, and that's the way you do it. So next couple of weekends, they go to the mother-in-law, and, the newly husband decide to ask the new mother-in-law, well, why you guys buy a pound of cheese, try to cut it really thin instead of get the supermarket people to cut it, and then they froze the other half? Well, because that's the way you do it. You go, you buy, and then froze the other half. That's the way my mother used to do it. Oh, okay. Well, a month later, they go to the grandma's house, and then the guy instead, still, puzzled by this, go and ask the grandma and say, Grandma, why you used to buy a pound of cheese, try to cut it really thin, and then froze the other half? Oh, it's simple. When we got married, the only thing that fits on our fridge was half of the pound. But the cheese guy came every 2 weeks, so if we don't buy a full pound, we will need to go a week without cheese. And sadly, that's how we do a lot of things in productivity. We look at things because that's the way we learn it, or that's the way we used to do it because that was practical when we start doing it. And sometimes we miss to analyze the why we do certain things and put negative feelings and negative things into our list or into the actions we do that they can really go. But it's, in my experience, not until you give yourself that permission that you analyze them and get rid of them. And what the do not do list gives you is two things. One, the permission to analyze it, that a lot of people need, okay, me included. And second, the permission to say, you know what, I am not doing this, and this is going to be the official decision. And funny enough, you mentioned the yard. There is one that says, I pay for someone to do the yard work, exactly for the same reason you mentioned.
I just wanted to add to that. I think there's a modern day equivalent of the cheese story, which is that the blackberries apparently used to be shipped when there was a blackberries were around. They were originally shipped with all of their alerts turned on, which meant that you got an alert for every piece of email that came to the BlackBerry. And I heard a story that they eventually changed the policy and shipped BlackBerries without the alerts turned on. Only the phone ring was turned on. Everything else was turned off as a default. And the reason is that people around the world were going crazy. They were answering every beep, buzz, and this is back in maybe the early 2000s when you actually used to answer every notification and every alert, and it would stop you in your tracks, and you would do something about it. But the inadvertent sort of decision to ship the items, the phones with the defaults on, led to behaviors that I think we still see today. And I think designers often make these decisions that reverberate in our lives and have an effect on our productivity. But it's only when we get to sort of a level of consciousness that we say, well, why am I making myself crazy by keeping on this alert for my, let's say even Outlook on your laptop? People in my classes are amazed to hear that you can turn off the sound, the icon, the visible notification. They're amazed to hear that you can turn these things off. And one of the questions they often ask, well, how do I do it? I said, well, ask someone in IT and they can take you through the steps. But the new level of awareness is required sort of to get to the point where we can turn off some of these behavior inducements that weren't really put there by anyone with our best intentions in mind.
What we're talking about here in terms of a do not do list can be manifested in many different ways. From what I'm hearing, my own experience with this is for me, I created a mission statement probably 20 plus years ago and have been modifying that mission statement. And to a great extent, some of the things that we're talking about here are those things that appear on that mission statement. And they are, it's prose, but they are things that I will do and will not do, and they're values statements though. So they're not necessarily very specific granular items that I'm not going to do, but they certainly fit a category of things that I won't allow in my life or won't allow myself to deal with. And then there's the other, which is more tactical and technological, which is, for many years, the first thing I did every time I got a new computer was install all of the various software that I wanted to, and then immediately turned off all the notifications. You should opt into notifications. You shouldn't be opted into the notifications automatically. I very much believe in this idea that no one should be automatically pushing you all of these notifications from applications, especially email, where the volume is so high today. In line with that, let's talk a little bit about how to create a do not do list. So the first thing out the gate is that you can go online, and if you just type in do not do or the not do list, you will find many productivity blog posts with examples of these. And with that in mind, though, I really liked Michael Hyatt had put out a blog post, and he gave a kind of a good list of things you can do in order to create a do not do list, or what he called a not to do list. And I thought it was a sort of an easy, thoughtful 6-item list. So I'm just going to read these off, and then we can kind of discuss around that. So he said, number 1, and I'm quoting from the article, find a quiet place where you can think. 2, look at your previous month's calendar activities. Write down anything you're not sure really fits your current job description. 3, look at your upcoming appointments for the next month. Write down things that are questionable in terms of your current job description. 4, go through your to-do list or lists and do the same thing. Write down the questionable activities given your new role. 5, you should now have a list of not-to-do candidates. And then 6, now go through the list and put an asterisk beside each item that is significant enough that you want to add it to your official not-to-do list and shove it off your plate. End quote. So, and I'll put a link to this post in the show notes. So, Augusto, going back to your own methodology for doing this, it sounds fairly organic. For listeners who are attempting to come up with a do not do list, how should they approach it? Where should they start? Is what Michael Hyatt's talking about here a good methodology? Is there more that you would add to it?
As always, keep it simple. Okay, no, you don't need to have a 30 items list, or it can be a 1 item, but pay attention to 2 things. What are the things that usually the things tend to be part of your routine and tend to bring a high emotional component. So, as Francis was sharing, I was noticing I was spending a whole day, doing this backyard thing. Well, I guarantee you, without knowing, that at the end of that day, Francis wasn't feel proud about the fact that he wasted a whole Sunday or Saturday or day, okay, doing the backyard. It was the other way around. He was frustrated. So pay attention to that emotional component, okay? 1. Second, pay attention to when you get frustrated. And there is a difference between the emotional components and the frustration. Frustration is a really specific one, because a lot of time those frustrations, what it means is you are doing something that A, you should not do, or B, you should do in a different way, or C, you should pay somebody to do. That is fine, okay? Pay attention to those 2 elements and let the list come organically. Yeah, my list has probably 10 items. It's not that long, but hasn't come in a day, has taken me a while. As soon as you identify the first one, then you will find others that will come, that should come in there. I have one, I have mentioned a couple that I have on my list, and I have one that says I do not finish a book that I do not enjoy. After more than 25% of the book is read, if I'm not enjoying it, I just dump it. I read over 60 books a year. And for the longest time, I will need to finish the book. And what that did was slow down my reading process, because I look at the book and say, oh, I don't want to read this, or I'm not getting into the book, or I don't enjoy the book. And then it took me forever to finish the book. And at some point, Steve Levine from Levenger mentioned a comment about dropping the book. And I say, that is true. If there's so many books out there, why I'm suffering through this book that I'm not enjoying? And I went to my do not do list, think about it, and say, you know what? From now on, every book I have read, 25% of the book, if I'm not enjoying the book, out. And by the way, if you're reading one of the books I have read and you are not enjoying it, please dump it. It works everywhere. But be patient with this list. The list will come if you start paying attention. The second is write it down. No, you don't need to come every morning and read the list. If you do it maybe every other week, maybe during your weekly review, maybe every other week, at least once a month, will be enough. Usually the things that will end up in the list have the emotional component that you will remember. What are the things that you just give permission to? Nobody's spending the Saturday or the Sunday doing the backyard that they dislike, okay? And when they finally give themselves the permission to hire somebody and figure it out, or simply make this, you know what? We are going to be the ones with a crappy yard. and we are okay with that. Even if that is the decision, you are going to remember those kind of decisions. Things as Art mentioned, hey, we put it in this list and eventually we decide, he's coming, if we go to getting things done term, basically he's putting all that information and all those things into a particular file and saying, well, let's review it once in a while. And once in a while he say, until we are really ready. And then eventually said, well, not interested, dump it. Same thing. I have on my list, the Apple 27-inch monitors. Okay? I don't have a computer to connect to that. My main machine is an iPad. Okay, and I still have walked into the Apple store and look at those and say, wow, that will look so nice on my home office. Okay, I do not even have a computer to connect to that. But regardless, it's a piece of technology that I will buy, okay? That not only I will buy, that I will spend hours thinking about how I'm going to make that work. And suddenly I said, you know what? Out. No, it's coming to the list. And then every time the thinking is coming, I go, nope, that is on the list. End of this thinking cycles. You cannot use N6 cycles for that. I have on my list, I will not get a low compatible. It's not that I have one. I have bought two of them. Okay, because the first one, well, may have been the model. So I bought it, disliked it, sold it, bought another car, sold that car, then bought another compatible. I was like, no, I have a romantic idea of this compatible. But when I get into that thing really low, I don't like them. So now, if you look into my list, it says, I will never buy another compatible because I don't like the car that are really low. So, but the problem is not that, okay? The problem is before I put it in the list, I spend hours ruminating about, if I get a compatible or I see the picture of a compatible, say, that will be nice. Let me look online what it is online about compatibles right now. What are the hottest one? What are the newest one? And I spend hours researching a vehicle that, no, I should not get, period. So it's not only about actions, it's also about things. It's also about, again, you need to understand what makes you productive and what you need to stop doing because it robbed you out of that productivity part. For me, spending an hour researching compatibles that I should not buy because I will not enjoy, it's not the best use of my time. So having that list and having that item in that list remind me immediately, nope, this is a decision we made a long time ago, end of the decision, and I can move forward instead of spending the hours and maybe going to the dealers and maybe test drive that compatible.
So it sounds to me like there's a little bit of reflection that can be done from things that are emotionally negative for you and figuring out those things that you do not want to do in the future because of them. And then it also sounds like there can be some contemplation about forecasting things that would not be healthy for you to do in the future and at all. You know what I mean? So I know that I'm not built for yard work, to continue Francis's story from earlier. And so, not that I'm incapable of doing it, but I know that there are just things that are more important for me to spend my time doing. So that's going to naturally be something that I'm going to think about. So from my perspective, for the listening audience, what I would do and what I do is immediately think of things that I should not be doing that would be wasting my time in essence, or causing me great emotional distress, right? As in Augusto's story about, cleaning the car. Go ahead and create systems, put systems in place so that you don't have to do them, right? Either through automation, creating greater efficiency first, automation, then potentially delegating that to someone else, whether that be, someone in your family. In Augusto's case, you could pass the torch down of cleaning the car to one of your children. But if you want to save them from that, then obviously finding a vendor to be able to do that for you. So it sounds to me like there's a natural progression here of saying, okay, this is not going to be done at all. And I think Augusto, you said that, right? We're just going to be the folks with the bad lawn. We're just not going to deal with that, and we're just going to be comfortable with that level. Then it's okay. Well, how can we create greater efficiency if we are going to do it? How are we going to automate this if possible? There are those automated, they're like Roombas, but for the lawn, right? So you just put the little Roomba out there and it goes out and cuts your lawn and then does all the work for you, and then finally hiring a lawn mowing service. And so there are a wide variety of ways in which you can manifest the do not do list in real time without actually keeping a list, so to speak. And then there is the actual overt keeping of a list with granular specific items that you are not going to do and that you review on occasion. Is there anything that I missed in there?
I love what Augusto said about the emotional trauma being the reason why you'd want to add something to a not-do list. I just started my own not-do list here in Keep after several years of not having one, inspired by what he said. And I just identified one that I have that's a difficult one for me. And it's to stop speaking when someone else is typing. So, very simple, right? So difficulty comes when the other person is a prospective client, for example. And I'm in that meeting with them and they drift over to their smartphone and we're talking about something important and they're gone. And to discipline myself to shut up until they either notice or stop typing or return their attention to the conversation 100%. It's difficult. No, one thing is to identify the habit or the trigger that sets off the habit, the new habit I'm trying to put in place. I think new habits sometimes can help to when you have a not do list, because the trigger could be some item and you have to start a new habit as opposed to going into an old one. But in this case, it's seeing the trigger and then having the courage to engage in this brand new habit, which is the same as not engaging in the old habit. But it's that courage to do it when it's difficult. When you're trying to impress the client, you're meeting them for the potential client, you're meeting them for the first time, and they engage in this behavior and sticking to your guns in that moment. I don't have any bad experiences to share from doing this, but there are others that are a little bit like that, where I sometimes have to confront the client about some bad behavior that are also more difficult. But the courage, I think, is essential. It's essential to overcome the emotional trauma and have it repeat itself.
Yeah, I just looking at this whole process, and I think there's a great deal of value to this. I think everybody's going to have to approach this one personally. I don't know that there's a clear guidance that can be provided to say, this is how you take your stuff and subdivide it into what not to do and what to do. And you're going to have to go through this one kind of trial and error and get a sense as to how do you feel most comfortable sloughing things off of what you're doing. It's a really critical thing to do, though. And I think all of us need to put a little bit more effort into making sure that we're doing the correct things. A tagline I use all the time is productivity is doing the right thing at the right time in the right way. And I think this absolutely marries to that.
I would agree. This is a very personal process and requires your reflection and planning so that you are capable of doing it. At the same time, it harkens to, for me, in the Getting Things Done or GTD weekly review. This is the time in which I am looking at my system and looking at things that are inefficient or, are competing with my responsiveness, and or if my responsiveness is competing with my effectiveness, and dealing with the things that I will and will not do going forward. Thank you, everybody, for this conversation. Do you have any questions or comments about this episode, something we discussed in the cast or otherwise about personal productivity? Please visit productivitycast.net/contact and let us know. Thanks to Augusto, Francis, and Art for joining me here on this cast. You can find this episode's show notes and the links to anything that we discussed and how to subscribe, they're at productivitycast.net/036. That's the episode number 036. And if you could, feel free to leave a rating or review in iTunes to help us grow our personal productivity community of listeners like you. So thank you. That brings us to the close of this episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. I'm Ray Sidney Smith with Augusto Pinaud, Francis Wade, and Art Gelwicks. Here's to your productive life.
That's it for this ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud, with Francis Wade and Art Gelwicks.